Isla Thornton had always been drawn to places with history. As a writer, she found that the stories buried in the past were often the richest, filled with intrigue, tragedy, and mystery. Her latest project took her to the small coastal town of Gray Harbor, known for its fog-laden shores and the abandoned lighthouse that stood on the edge of the cliffs. It was said that the lighthouse had been deserted for decades after a tragedy involving the last keeper. Some whispered that his spirit still roamed the lighthouse, while others claimed they heard strange sounds coming from the old structure on stormy nights. Isla had rented a small cottage in Gray Harbor to get close to the lighthouse. Her goal was to write a series of articles about haunted places, but secretly, she hoped to find out what had really happened there. The townspeople were friendly but guarded, their voices dropping to hushed tones whenever she asked about the lighthouse. It was as though they carried a collective secret that weighed on them, a pact not to speak too much about the past. On her first night in Gray Harbor, Isla lay awake, listening to the waves crashing against the cliffs. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of the lighthouse, a dark shape against the starless sky. She felt a shiver of excitement mixed with fear, and she knew she wouldn't be able to resist exploring the lighthouse for long. The next morning, Isla visited the local library, hoping to find records or stories related to the lighthouse. The librarian, a woman in her 70s named Ms. Penny, gave her a knowing look as Isla mentioned her interest. "Not many folks go poking around the lighthouse these days," Ms. Penny said, her voice low. "People around here prefer to let it be." "Why is that?" Isla asked, leaning in with curiosity. Ms. Penny sighed, glancing around to ensure no one else was listening. "There was an accident years ago. The keeper, Mr. Elwood, lived up there all alone. They say he was a kind man, dedicated to his work. But one stormy night, he disappeared. No one ever found his body, only his belongings scattered around the lighthouse as if he'd left in a hurry." Isla scribbled notes furiously, her mind racing with possibilities. "Do you think it's true that he still haunts the place?" Miss Penny's eyes darkened. "Some believe so. Strange lights have been seen there, and sounds, but whether it's Elwood or something else, I can't say." Armed with this information, Isla decided to visit the lighthouse the following night. She packed a flashlight, her notebook, and a small recorder, determined to document anything unusual. As dusk settled over Gray Harbor, Isla made her way to the cliffs. The path was narrow and overgrown, winding through thick brambles that snagged her coat and scratched her skin. By the time she reached the lighthouse, the last traces of daylight had faded, and a heavy mist had rolled in from the sea, wrapping around the lighthouse like a ghostly veil. The lighthouse loomed above her, its cracked windows staring out like empty eyes. Isla took a deep breath and stepped inside, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of salt and decay hung heavy. She moved cautiously, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She found herself in the main room, where a spiral staircase led up to the lantern room. As she climbed the steps, her pulse quickened, each creak of the wood sending a shiver down her spine. When she reached the top, she found the lantern itself, a rusted, broken relic of another time. Setting her recorder on a ledge, Isla whispered, "This is Isla Thornton, inside the Gray Harbor Lighthouse. I've reached the lantern room, and there's a strange feeling here, like I'm being watched." She fell silent, listening, but all she heard was the distant crash of waves. Still, the feeling persisted, a prickling at the back of her neck, as though someone was standing just behind her. And then, faintly, she heard it, a tapping sound, rhythmic and steady. She spun around, but there was no one there. Heart racing, she inched closer to the edge of the room, where the tapping seemed to be coming from. But as quickly as it had started, the sound stopped, leaving only the eerie silence. Suddenly, her flashlight flickered, casting shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. She froze, watching as one shadow lingered a moment too long, its shape resembling a figure hunched by the lantern. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. There was no response, but a faint whisper seemed to echo around the room, a voice just out of reach. Isla strained to hear, feeling her heart pound louder as the voice grew clearer. You shouldn't be here. Isla's blood ran cold. The voice was low, filled with a sadness that sent a chill down her spine. Gathering her courage, she called out, Are you Elwood, the keeper? The silence stretched, heavy and foreboding. Just when she thought there would be no answer, the voice returned, softer this time. They took everything. Isla Thornton, who took everything? What happened to you? But there was no answer, only the sound of the wind howling through the cracks in the lighthouse. Frustrated and shaken, Isla picked up her recorder and prepared to leave. As she reached the stairs, she glanced back, feeling a strange pull to stay, to uncover the truth hidden within these walls. But a loud crash from below jolted her out of her thoughts. She raced down the steps, her flashlight revealing shattered glass and scattered papers littering the floor. It was as if a storm had swept through, yet the windows were intact, and no one else was inside. She quickly gathered her things and left, her mind racing with questions. Back in her cottage, Isla replayed the recording, listening for the voice. But the tape was blank, filled only with the sound of her own footsteps and breathing. Over the next few nights, Isla returned to the lighthouse, each visit bringing her closer to the truth. She began to piece together the fragments of Elwood's life, discovering journals hidden within the walls, recounting his dedication and loneliness, and hinting at a betrayal by those he had trusted. The tapping returned each night, and the voice grew stronger, recounting a story of loss and isolation. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside, Isla felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to climb to the top of the lighthouse one last time. She reached the lantern room, her heart pounding as she heard the voice, louder and clearer than ever before. They took everything from me, but I'm still here. As the lantern flickered to life, casting an eerie glow around the room, Isla finally understood. Elwood's spirit was bound to the lighthouse, trapped by the weight of his betrayal. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. With a deep breath, she whispered, I'll tell your story, Elwood. I'll make sure people know what happened to you. The lantern's light brightened, and for the first time, Isla felt a sense of peace fill the room. The shadows lifted, and the tapping ceased, leaving only the sound of the waves crashing below. As she made her way back to her cottage, Isla felt a strange warmth settle over her. She knew that Elwood's spirit had finally found rest, his story no longer hidden in the shadows of the lighthouse.